Okay, so we left off last after we finally finished the Spanish-American War. And through that, we got 3 new territories, right? Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. So now we're going to talk about what happens next in the Philippines. So I told you that Congress had to pass the Treaty of Paris, in Congress, just like a bill, just like they did a declaration of war. It has to pass in Congress a treaty. Basically has to do the same thing. The day before Congress voted on the Treaty of Paris, the Filipinos began to revolt against U.S. control in the Philippines. So before we even are officially in control and the proud owner of the Philippines, the Filipinos are already trying to get rid of us. So what happens next is the American-Filipino War. So a lot of people don't even really know that we fought a war in the Philippines. And a lot of that is because of, not because we don't win, because we do win, but it's really because of the just how harsh this is. And we're not really proud of the way that we won. So it's not that great. So the American-Filipino War is going to go on for 4 years, so much longer than the Spanish-American War. But we're going to have far less men fight in it. We only have about 120,000 men fighting the American-Filipino War. But of that 120,000, 4,200 result in casualties. Now that is a much, much higher casualty rate than we saw in the Spanish-American War. And a lot of that has to do with the length of the war. It was just so much longer, but also some savage military tactics that both sides are using. So our commander in the Philippines is going to be this guy on the left, Arthur MacArthur. I know it's a funny name. So Arthur MacArthur is a general in the Philippines, and he's really using a 2-part strategy to win the war. And part 1 of the strategy is going to be carried out by his counterpart, William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft is appointed to be the Governor General of the Philippines. So he's basically running the government in the Philippines for the United States. And the strategy that MacArthur lays out is really to work well with the people who are willing to work with us. Be nice to the people who are nice to you. So the Filipino people who were willing to work with the United States, even rebels who surrendered and then were open to working with us, we grant them a lot of concessions. William Howard Taft appoints a lot of Filipinos to government positions. He begins to favor government control of utilities. He sponsors a lot of public works programs, things like infrastructure improvements and electricity and water. So we're really trying to improve the lives of the Filipino people who are willing to work with us. On the other hand, part 2 of the strategy is MacArthur's part, and that is no mercy for your enemies. So anyone who was suspected of being a rebel, anyone who was suspected of hiding rebels would be sent to concentration camps. So we were using concentration camps. We're basically doing all the same things that the Spanish did in Cuba. We're doing all the same things in the Philippines. So we sent people to concentration camps. There are a lot of mass executions. The violence in the American-Filipino War is definitely next level compared to the Spanish-American War. The ratio of dead to wounded of the Filipinos is actually 15-1. So for every 1 person we wound, we kill 15 more. So you see this picture in the middle here. This is a group of Filipinos who were being buried like sort of in a trench mass grave. Because we use so many mass grave burials, we don't really know exactly how many Filipino people were killed in the American-Filipino War. We estimate that it was between 50,000 and 200,000. So I know that's a really big range I just gave, 50,000 to 200,000, but like I said, a lot of that is because of the mass graves, and we didn't even really know necessarily how many Filipino fighters there were to begin with, so it's really hard to estimate the number of casualties when you don't have like a firm grasp on what you're getting yourself into to begin with. So all of the guerrilla warfare and everything's going on. MacArthur and Taft are doing their thing. And by 1902, this two-part strategy is working, and the whole thing finally fizzles out, and we're able to squash it. Now, there will be some sort of sporadic fighting for the next few years, really until 1913, but for the most part, we are holding on to the Philippines for quite some time after this. So now looking at Cuba, we've left Cuba in their independent state, correct? And now in 1900, they hold a constitutional convention. They need to set up their own government now that they're an independent country. And so they're sort of basing that off of how we got our independence and the same way our government works. So when they hold their constitutional convention, they're sort of looking over things, and they're like, we could use some advice and a little bit of help, maybe some aid from the United States. So they ask us for that, and the United States is like, yes, we'll write up an Army appropriations bill allotting some aid and stuff to Cuba, and then we add to that Army appropriations bill something called the Platt Amendment. And the Platt Amendment basically says that in return for this, we want three things from Cuba. We want them to, number one, not make any treaties with any foreign powers. Number two, we are allowed to stick our noses in their political or economic affairs whenever we want. We can intervene. And then number three, they have to provide land for a naval base, which will eventually be Guantanamo Bay. So if you remember the Teller Amendment, you're probably very confused, because we went into the Spanish-American War saying that we didn't want any territory from Cuba, and we weren't planning on taking over Cuba. Well, what have we done with the Platt Amendment? We've essentially made it a territory. We haven't technically, so don't think that Cuba's a territory, but we have gained some land here for a military base, and it's just a very hypocritical situation here. But nonetheless, Cuba agrees, so we can sort of add Cuba to our sphere of influence, not necessarily as a territory, but definitely as something that we have a lot of control over. So our Secretary of State, John Hay, remember him? He's the one who called the Spanish-American War a splendid little war. John Hay gets a lot of credit for something called the open door policy. This is something he works out with China. So today, we purchase a lot of things from China, but back then it was sort of the opposite, and everything that we made, we were sending to China. China was really the customer and the consumer for a lot of different countries. So we, every country, every major Western country, we're all fighting with who's going to get to be sort of the exclusive provider of goods for China. We're all trying to get trade deals and contracts with China. But this can be dangerous. Like if we're the only ones doing it, it can hurt other economies. If we end up losing the contract, it can hurt our economy. It can hurt our relationship with China. So John Hay comes with the open door policy. It's basically something saying that we all agree to openly trade with China, and we're not going to interfere with other countries trading with China. So sort of like we'll be good and leave you alone. Everybody can just participate in this. It's all, there's enough to go around, basically. So he sends this to all these major Western countries, and they really love it. It's sort of like, if everyone else is doing it, then I guess I'm in too. And he signs this. So you see this political cartoon at the bottom. There's Uncle Sam holding this key to the doors to China, allowing all these European powers in to start trading. So it ends up being very good for us, and he gets a lot of support for that. Now, later, we are still going to be involved with China for other reasons. So this is what I'm about to talk about next is the Boxer Rebellion. So you might have learned about the Boxer Rebellion in world history, but maybe not. So when all of this is going on and we're starting to do all this trade in China, the Chinese start to see a rise in nationalism and xenophobia. If you remember, xenophobia is the fear of foreigners. So all of these foreign countries dealing with them and trying to trade with them and everything, it's causing a lot of xenophobic feelings in China. And in 1900, a group of radical nationalists end up trying to start a rebellion, and they start targeting pretty much anyone who's not Chinese, and that includes missionaries, and they start killing a lot of Christians. And now remember, there are already a lot of American missionaries in China, So some of our people are some of these targets, and we can't allow that. So we set ourselves up here to sort of be the peacekeepers. We're going to act like the police here. So we team up with the Chinese government, and we send in U.S. troops into Beijing and squash this whole rebellion and put it to rest. So we're able to protect our economic interests at the same time as sort of serving as this global police force, which is a reputation we still have today. So when William McKinley ran for his second term as president, he brought in Teddy Roosevelt as his new VP, and about 6 months into his second term, he is assassinated by an anarchist. So that means that Teddy Roosevelt is going to be our new president. So now we're going to talk about 3 things quickly that are Teddy Roosevelt's foreign policy, his imperialistic foreign policy. So the first is the Roosevelt Corollary. So if you remember what the Monroe Doctrine was, this is sort of an expansion on that. The Monroe Doctrine said that no one was allowed to come to the United States, or really North America for that matter, or we would see it as dangerous to our peace and safety, which would essentially be an act of war. The Roosevelt Corollary expands on that, saying not just North America, but Latin America as well. So any European country who maybe is owed money by a Latin American country, we said, don't come here to collect that money, just let us know, and we will be the muscle and the middleman for you. So we would, volunteer to send gunboats to that Latin American country, or we would block all their ports and monitor their government until they were able to pay the debt back or something like that. So you see this cartoon here. We've got Roosevelt standing across this border and blocking Latin America and Europe from getting to each other, even though they're all like trying to talk to each other and hand each other stuff. We're stopping that from happening, carrying what Teddy Roosevelt called his big stick. Speak softly and carry a big stick. That basically means be nice to people, but you got to have a lot of force to back it up. Don't let people think that you're just a pushover. So the Latin American people don't really respond to this very well. Once again, this is us trying to sort of be the police of the, if not the world, at least the Western Hemisphere. The next thing here is the Panama Canal, which is a really incredible feat of engineering. We helped the Panamanians fight a revolution and get their independence from the Colombians. And in return, they agreed to lease us what we call the canal zone. And the canal didn't exist at that time. We've got to construct it ourselves, but they're going to let us use the land. So we work on the Panama Canal from 1904 to 1914. It takes 14 years to build, and we pay Panama a $10 million down payment up front, and then every year after that we will pay them another $250,000 as a sort of rent. So that's just for the land. That's not construction. We have to invest, millions more dollars into the construction. It takes 35,000 men to construct this canal over a 10-year time period. We even have to send doctors down to Panama to start working on medical advancements for all of the tropical diseases that we were seeing. But finally in 1914, we finish off the Panama Canal, and it is incredible, and it cuts off a total of 800 miles from the trading route from the west coast to the east coast, which is just really incredible. It's a time saver, which means it's a money saver. So we're all about saving money at this point. So we are really helping ourselves economically. And then the last thing here is going to be Teddy Roosevelt once again trying to be those peacekeepers of the world. So in 1904, I believe, the Russians and the Japanese entered a war with each other, the Russo-Japanese War. They were fighting over some land. And things are getting out of hand, and, we want to keep everything calm. We've got interests in Asia that we want to protect. So Teddy Roosevelt invites the Russians and the Japanese to New Hampshire to work on a peace treaty, and they negotiate, they sign a peace treaty, we end the war. Awesome possum. But the Japanese felt like maybe we allowed the Russians to have the upper hand in the war, so we wanted to make an agreement with the Japanese so they knew that we were still on good terms. So they wanted us to stop discriminating against Japanese immigrants. So in return, we say that we'll do that, but in return we want them to stop or restrict immigration to the United States. So sort of the thought process there is to get rid of racism, we'll get rid of the minority. And Japan agrees. This isn't a formal agreement. This is just sort of an under-the-table deal, and it's known as the Gentleman's Agreement. Not very gentlemanly, but nonetheless, we do make this agreement with Japan.